All right, moving on to fundamental number 9, which is
Dynamic control.
dynamic control. And this is coming after the explanation of style, because this is a part of styling. A lot of people think that singing loud and soft is something we do in the beginning, but it takes a lot of finesse to sing louder or softer, because that's what dynamics are, guys, the dynamic volumes of your voice. So in singing, when we say dynamics, we're talking about volume. And so it's so easy to think, oh, well, wouldn't I talk about controlling my volume from the beginning? We kind of do, but not to the point where you think it would go. Like, we're not going to talk about extreme volume changes until your voice is fully balanced. And so that's why we're kind of lumping this in with style. Dynamic control is very important from the beginning, and that's why we talk about even airflow in the beginning.
Yeah.
But we're kind of keeping everything consistent with the dynamics until we're balanced. And then we can talk about how we're going to increase our volume and decrease it without throwing the balance out. And so I definitely think that's part of style.
Well, and so in the beginning we talked about exhalation, right? And this is where I would think naturally, okay, this is where dynamic control would go, because
The airflow.
it's all in how you're exhaling. Is that correct?
That's part of it. Definitely the way you control the volume and everything. It has to do with the amount of air passing through the vocal cords, but it also has to do with how adducted or closed the cords are too. So it's that balance again. And that's why getting that balance established is so important before you start singing super loud. There's no reason for you to sing loud high notes until you can actually sing high notes consistently without any strain. Right? Because if you have the balance all the way through your voice and it's nice and consistent kind of in a talking level at that volume, then building that is much, much easier, and keeping and sustaining it into a balanced optimal place and making it so that we're not straining. But as soon as you try to sing just loud notes out the gate, you're going to throw yourself right out of balance.
See, and I think it's great that you distinguish that, because most people think high notes you have to really push and get loud to achieve a high note.
No.
But you said until you can sing high notes like consistently, right? So you don't have to sing high notes loud.
No.
So there's loud notes and high notes.
Yeah, they're not the same. They're not like one and the same thing. But yeah, everyone like takes big deep breaths like they have to achieve a high note because it's like climbing a mountain, and they're like going to blast all their air through it to get up to it. Right?
I think it's because we always grow up with these images of like opera singers where they're like, that's the final note, right?
That's a different game too, but they're also leaning into it, so they're going to throw a ton of air through it, right?
Right.
But here's the thing that you have to keep in mind, and this is a myth I love to debunk all the time, and that is we always so psychologically when we picture a high note, we think it's physically high in our bodies. But the interesting thing about the terminology of high and low notes all comes back down to the speed of the sound wave. So the only reason low notes are called low is because they are a lower frequency pitch. They move slower. They're less frequent.
Right.
And the only reason high notes are called high is because they are a high frequency pitch. They move at a higher frequency. They move faster.
Right.
Okay? So the funny thing is just high notes are faster, low notes are slower. Boom. But we call them low and high because of the high frequency and low frequency pitch. The problem with this terminology is that psychologically our brain goes, okay, high and low. And it thinks that this physical ladder that moves up and down and physically in your voice. Your vocal cords don't move when you sing up and down, when you sing high and low notes. But because of the psychology of those words, it can really mess us up.
Right.
So when people tell you to go up on your toes to sing a high note, that does not help you. It doesn't help. It actually makes you strain for it.
Right, because you're thinking that you need to get...
That you're climbing a mountain with your voice.
When really, like you were saying, so sound waves, right? Because that's what we're creating is sound waves. And so like you were saying, the frequency of the wave, so it's really fast, that's a high note.
How frequent it happens.
Right?
Yeah.
Or if it's like
slower,
right?
slower and
then it's lower.
Less,
now
less
loud
frequent.
Notes have a higher amplitude. Right?
They do.
So that's the difference, is you can have a high amplitude and still have it go slower or faster. So you can have loud notes that are lower and loud notes that are higher.
Sure
right?
thing. Yeah. I mean, that's just physics, right?
Right.
So it's interesting how much of this is physics. But I just want to paint that picture for you singers that we're not reaching for high notes. it's a coordination shift. That's all it is. Your vocal cords are just going to sit right here, and they're just going to shift a little bit from your chest voice coordination to your head voice coordination. That is all. So try not to pull up for notes. And also it comes back to that airflow too, right? When you want to sing a high note, you don't throw extra air through it. You keep everything nice and stable all the way through, just like we're talking. Okay. And once you can get that nice and even and established, then we can start to talk about dynamics. So soft to loud, loud to soft, medium, and all that. So let's talk about the terminology for basic music dynamics, just in case you're not on the page with us, if you've never like taken music lessons or anything like that. So all the music terminology is in Italian. We love it because it sounds pretty with everything we say. So things that are soft are piano. Piano means soft. Okay.
Piano doesn't mean a piano.
No, interestingly enough, if you guys watch like Jane Eyre and like all of the Jane Austen stuff, and, you know, and that term, they talk about the piano forte. The piano used to be called the piano forte because it was an instrument that could be played loud and soft, because forte means loud, right? And over the years, we just got lazy. We just started calling it the piano. So that's why it's called the piano. But it's not because it can only be played soft. So piano means soft. Mezzo piano means medium soft. Mezzo forte, medium loud. Forte, loud. You also have pianissimo and fortissimo, which is like the extremes, right? But most of the time it's piano, mezzo forte, and forte. Soft, medium loud, loud. Okay, so those are kind of the dynamic markings that we see in music. And
so we know when people go loud, right?
Mm-hmm.
Typically when people go loud, they tend to push super hard.
Yeah, and they tighten up their vocal cords really tight, and they push lots of air up against them, and there's just a ton of tension.
But what are some issues when people go low? Because I think this is something that's discussed a whole lot less. If the bad part about trying to go loud is that you push super hard, what's the bad part about going low? Like where are some pitfalls? Yeah, soft. Yeah, exactly.
So usually when we're singing breathy, it's because there's not enough vocal cord adduction. So we're going to say adduction again is closure, right? So it can mean that you're overblowing air and the vocal cords are like the muscles just not nice and taut, right? So you're kind of getting a lot of extra air like that. So that can happen. And it does happen. I kind of sound like a dog without a larynx.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say.
So that can happen. That scenario can happen. But then you can also have this situation where the vocal cords are coming together, but you're putting so little air through it that they're not fully closing, and there's not enough that Bernoulli effect. There's not enough that air pressure. So then you kind of get more of this nice, soft feel to it, and it gets really quiet. And sometimes that can be really nice in music if you want to just have that really breathy, beautiful tone for a style choice. That's really great. But it's also nice if you sing quieter, if you can keep it nice and connected sound instead of having this. We're kind of here still, but we're just talking a little bit quieter.
So it's more like a whisper.
A whisper. Versus just talking very quiet. So you can still have a very connected, beautiful, clear sound while you're singing quietly, or you can choose to go full breathy, you know, and I would say that's definitely on the piano spectrum of it. Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah. But we definitely, if we can achieve the louder sounds without shouting and blowing our voices out, that's the ideal goal. And that's why we want to have that even airflow and muscle closure with the centered acoustics that we were talking about, so that we can get the balance and then lean into it.
Because that's something that I've heard you talk about, is volume is achieved by balance, not just by like forcing tons of air.
Yeah, you don't want to just let it go and you don't want to push, right? It's having that balance between the two so that you can then build it and take it back as much as you want. But it all starts with that even balance.
So I think one of the reasons why we hold this off until the end is, one, like you said, it has to do with a lot of style, but also you don't want people to really get too much into this like dynamic extremes, right? Going from soft to loud, because there is so much potential for strain and like real damage if you haven't established all those other fundamentals first, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is where people start to get vocal nodules and things like that. If
they can really mess up their voices. Well, I think the problem is it's another psychological thing too. It's kind of like the low and high thing. When people just aim for volume, aim for loud, they tend to strain because there's a primal part of our bodies that engages the second you try to create loud high notes. And what you have to remember, your amygdala, your center brain, your middle brain between your ears, that's what controls your startle reflex and your fight or flight mechanism. And that is seriously so much more powerful than your frontal lobe. It engages to protect you, to make sure you don't die. Okay, so anytime you make a primal sound, and we've talked about primal sounds already, to like the whoop really helps us get a high note, and it's very natural for us to do that. It gets us into our head voice. Well, the contrast to that is the scream, right? It's the shrill scream that happens when we're in trouble. Your startle reflex is way more powerful in your brain than your joy reflex, than your excitement reflex that gives you a whoop. And so it's something that I want to caution you on. When you go to sing a loud, powerful note, your body is always primally going to go to that startle reflex first and is going to want to strain and scream, a shrill scream. So you're going to have the musculature and the primal feeling behind a shrill scream, and that's going to just trash your voice. So it's that building up of skill to say, okay, primally I want to be coming from the whoop to create this high, powerful sound, and kind of rewriting that so that when we're in singing mode, our body isn't going to the primal shrill scream. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so that's why another reason to build up all these skills so that you can effectively do this, because your body already knows how to do this. We can effectively do it without completely trashing our voices.
Sure.
Yeah. So volume, the thing I like to say is don't aim for volume, because if you do, you're going to scream, right? You're going to shrilly fight or flight scream. What I like to say is we like to aim for balance, because volume is a byproduct of balance. Volume just happens when the voice is balanced. You're going to sing louder naturally, and then you're going to be able to lean into it harder from a very natural place if you're balanced. So stop aiming for volume, because the second you do that, you're going to scream, and aim for balance.
All right. And with that, let's move on to the tip.
Yeah, let's go to the tip. Okay, let's get into talking about how you can have more dynamic control in your sound. And remember, dynamics are how loud and soft we are singing, okay? So as always, we're always going to pull it back to your talking voice, because if we can get your talking voice to function well for you, then we can get that to translate into your singing. So first of all, we want to make sure that when you're speaking, you're really in your true talking voice. So if you can just say, hello, like someone's standing in a room with you, not a hushed tone or a really loud, heavy tone, but just hello. So this is our talking voice. It's an even sound. It's a full voice. And really, I feel like if you're in your talking voice, you're kind of in that medium volume, right? Where you're going to just sing nice and even. It's not necessarily loud. It's not necessarily soft. It's just our normal talking voice. And if you consider that dynamic is actually part of our styling, it's also how we control energy in our singing as well. So if you're in your talking voice, then songs can be very conversational if you're in that same volume that we speak in. And that's why that's kind of our medium volume, right? So let's talk about how we can get into more of a hushed tone that's quiet and connected still without kind of just letting go of everything, right? So a quiet voice, I want you to be able to talk as quietly as possible, but still feel like everything is balanced. So we're not losing quality and tone. So if I start to talk softer and softer and softer and softer, and you're still hearing my voice come through, my talking voice, but then there's that idea of the disconnected sound, and we get breathy and breathy and breathy. And that can be effective if you want it to be very hushed and breathy. Sometimes artists choose to do that. But what we want you to be able to do is also be able to sing in a very connected sound, even when you're singing quiet, and have the breathy thing be more of a choice, not something you have to do. So it's that connected talking voice, and then we're just talking softer and softer and softer. So that's our quiet tone. That's going to be your piano tone. Remember, piano means soft. And then if we're going for more of that forte, then a really great way to find that, and we've kind of already talked about this, is use your hey timbre. Hey, right? talk loudly for your hey timbre, but we're not shouting. We're not yelling. Now you can try doing both and see if you can feel the difference. Hey, hey, that's going to give me that louder quality sound. And then there's, like I said, again, full on shouting. The funny thing is if you consider that you're communicating with people, when you're listening to a singer, do you want them to express themselves louder to you, or do you want them to shout at you? If you're going to like a screamo concert, then yeah, you might want them to shout. But most of the time, generally, when people are singing to you and they're singing with lots of passion, we want to hear that volume go up, but we don't necessarily want to just hear them yelling the whole time. So it's that line of getting that volume louder without pushing it over the edge. And that's why using that hey timbre can be very effective. So this is all just meant for you to start to kind of feel the difference in your voice between how much air we're using when we're singing it quietly or speaking quietly versus talking into a normal full talking voice versus hey and giving a lot more going through that. So that will help you start to just dial in what it even means to have this difference in dynamics.
We hope you guys are enjoying the Fundamentals of Singing video series here on YouTube. If you guys want more free resources on how we help our artists here at Invictivox, please check out the Invictivox Radio podcast on YouTube or any major podcast platform.